For deterrence, it's really vital that we are able to demonstrate that we are united in our intent, united in our investments, united in the way that we think about and operate in the space domain.
Hello, welcome to the Space Policy Show. I'm Colleen Stover with the Aerospace Corporation. How do international alliances for space increase resilience of our space systems? How about increased national or global security? We continue our series on the different perspectives of resiliency with today's show, hosting the Director of Defense Strategy and National Security at the Australian Strategic Policy Institute. Rebecca Shrimpton will also talk about Australia's unique geographic perspective and how the nation contributes to the space enterprise. Our own Dr. Mick Gleason returns to the show to lead the discussion, and he is Senior Policy Analyst at the Center for Space Policy and Strategy. All right, over to Mick and Rebecca now in our studio in Arlington, Virginia.
Thanks, Colleen. It's great to have Beck Shrimpton, the Defense Director of ESPI, with us today. So welcome to Washington, D.C. and to Aerospace Corporation's Center for Space Policy and Strategy.
Thanks so much. It's great to be here.
Could you tell us a little bit about ESPI? Because I'm not familiar with your organization very well.
Yeah,
so
sure.
That might be a good place to start.
Absolutely. The ASPI is short for the Australian Strategic Policy Institute. We are a national security think tank located in Canberra. Very close relationship with our Department of Defence, but we also have a diversified funding base, and we focus on major issues of relevance for the Australian, the regional, and I guess global security issues, what they mean for Australia, what they mean for the region, and of course a key part of our focus is our relationship with the United States. And for me personally, a passion and again a focus area for our research is space. Oh, great.
That's my passion too, so that works out well. So how did you originally get interested in space in Australia? And it seems like a pretty niche community there.
Yeah, it is. So I was posted to Washington, D.C. with the embassy when I was an official with Defence. I was Councillor Defence Strategic Policy at the time, and space policy, cyber missile defence, nuclear policy, strategy and planning were all in my portfolio of responsibilities. I didn't know very much about space when I first came into this job, and I had a bit of a baptism of fire. But it's actually it's your fault, you all here, that I now am completely obsessed with and passionate about space, because what I learnt and who I worked with, the OSD space policy team, General Hyten was then commander of Stratcom. He and Major General then Nina Armanio, both still very good friends and in contact with, just really shaped my understanding and my appreciation for the space domain, for how important it is to everything that defence does, and to the modern way of war, as well as deterrence. Deterrence has now also become a passion for me. So I grew my love of it here, and I took it home, and I've done my very, very best to spread that around as much as I can. But really, yeah, it all started here.
Great, that's quite the path. It is I think a really fun, interesting, very privileged for me to be part of the space community in the U.S. and hopefully around the world, I hope, for me too. So next question I have here on my list, just because we have a bunch of interesting questions to go through here to get everything we can from Beck, learn a lot. But more on a personal level, what would you say are the opportunities in the space sector, whether it's Australia or the US or around the world, for people who don't have STEM backgrounds? Do you have to really, it's good to have a STEM background, but do you have to have a STEM background to participate in space, the space enterprise?
I don't think you do. What I've learnt over time is that space is genuinely for everybody. You do need STEM. Of course you need your scientists and your engineers. There's an incredibly important role that they play. But equally, space needs lawyers, it needs historians, it needs storytellers, it needs agriculturalists, industrialists. The ability to communicate about the space domain and how very broadly it affects every part of our lives and so many sectors of our economy actually means that you need all of those sectors involved, and you need to be able to talk about space in a way that means something to people from all of those sectors. So there's a role for everyone, I think, in space, and I do think there's a misconception that you've got to be a scientist or an engineer to get into space, but you don't. I certainly am not. I do not have a STEM background. I have an arts and a policy background. Yet here I am, having had more than a decade's fun and immersion and great satisfaction from working in and with space people.
Yeah, and my degree is in international relations, so I can appreciate that. And it is important for the space workforce, whether in Australia or in the United States, to not, to be open to everybody who's interested, I think. And so, but I do think a lot of people assume that they have to have a STEM degree, and so I appreciate you mentioning your background and hopefully opening the aperture, so to speak, for as many people as possible to think about a space career field.
Excellent, yeah.
So let's focus more a little bit on Australian space and what's going on in Australia, the perspective, the view from Australia, and what's going on there. So what type of activities are going on in Australia? Maybe break it down in this kind of, if there's an Australian civil space sector, commercial space sector, military defense space sector, if maybe touch on each of those a little bit.
So there have been some really exciting developments in Australia around space, slightly, I guess, playing catch up to where others in the world are. Of course, the US for us and for many others is a global leader. But we in 2018 established the Australian Space Agency, which was responsible for civil, commercial, and noting that that these sectors, civil, commercial, and military, are all very much sort of overlapping and ever more integrating. So we'd had the remit when it was stood up to both be the regulator as well as to support industry development. So that was a huge thing, and it really did a lot to help our industry and put Australian space on the map. Similarly, we've quite recently, only about 3 years ago, established a space command by American standards and I guess European standards as well. It's very small and nascent, but nonetheless we have made that really important move of establishing a functional command for space. And what that's helping us do is think about space within defence strategy, policy and operations in a different way. Even in our most recent, we had a defence strategic review last year, and then this year a national defence strategy. The role of space has become elevated, articulated more clearly for everybody, and its role just much better understood both as a domain, as a warfighting domain, an operational domain, and its enabling function for all of those other elements of modern defence forces and modern warfighting. Okay. So it's we've been on a very interesting ride. I think what I will say is I think we're coming off a bit of a high, and I hope that we can kind of turn that around. If I may, for 1 second, indulge a really exciting recent development. We have just had our first Australian astronaut accredited through ESA, a young woman. She's an engineer, but she's got through the training. She's ready to fly. She's ready for a mission. So what I'd really love to see our space community do is get behind her, get her on that mission, and then use that as a catalyst to really further provide some impetus and momentum for our community, because as I said, we were on a really nice trajectory. I think we lost a little momentum, but we have this amazing story now and this amazing woman who can really galvanise our community again, and get more activity happening for Australia in space.
So what's her name?
Catherine Burnell-Pegg. Shout out to you, Catherine. Congratulations. We're all super proud of you.
Great. Well, congratulations, Catherine, and to you and to Australia for this accomplishment and all this success in the future on those endeavors.
You just made a really good point, and I thank you for it, because it's not just Catherine, and she would say this herself, but this is an Australian accomplishment, and this is an opportunity for Australia as a nation. It's not just about one individual, but she can really be a pathfinder for us again as a nation.
Now I have another person to watch progress through their
you
career.
You do.
Yeah, so I appreciate that.
Yep.
So you mentioned the standing up of the Australian Space Command. Is that what it's called?
Yeah.
And it's small, but I think a lot of people in the U.S., me included, we often don't appreciate how big the U.S. is, and we assume that other countries and our allies and partners have comparable organizations for us to plug into and for them to plug into the U.S. for international cooperation purposes, whether it's in DoD or civil space. And so I think, when I was first looking at with U.S. Department of Defense cooperation with Australia maybe 15 years ago, maybe even longer, it was hard to find what is the right place in the Australian MOD to plug into.
Correct. Yeah.
And we found people, but it was always a problem, and that's a challenge with many of our allies. Is trying, it's improved. The situation has improved vastly over the last 10 years, where our allies and partners are developing the organizations and standing up the organizations to plug easier into the U.S. Military space enterprise at a comparable level. So congratulations on that move too. I know that's not, we shouldn't just assume that these things exist, although it's human nature to do so based on personal, your own experience. So with that, there's a certain way, you mentioned Australian perspective on space and defense a little bit, but let's pull that thread a little bit more. You're in the same region as China.
Yep.
And you're a lot closer to China. We recognize China as a growing threat in space and in many other areas, maritime domain and Taiwan issues and so on and so forth. But what is the view, I guess, in Australia what's the value of space in helping deter China, whether it's in space or around the region there? Do you have a particular Australian perspective on that?
I'm really
you can share?
Grateful that you asked the question, because I think that needs to be a greater focus in the way that we think about China more broadly, as well as our own strategy and how we develop our policy and our operational concepts, the way we work with allies like the United States to respond to that. And the space domain for me is absolutely critical, but we don't really talk about it enough. And we this is a little on me, it's a little on a lot of us in the community, but we do need to help the public and the broader community understand what's happening in space. It's hard as people on Earth going about your daily business, worrying about things like cost of living, to stay focused on it. But this is absolutely fundamental for the future of humankind, and what China is doing in space, the way it thinks about the space domain, the centrality of space to China's strategy, both at the national level but for its defence, is really, really critical. So if we're not understanding that, then we are not ourselves responding and shaping our own capabilities and policy frameworks and collaborations to make sure that we are ready to meet that threat. And I think one of the things I would say is we are at risk of underestimating how ambitious China is, and just how much they're actually achieving. So they are moving fast. They have set extraordinarily ambitious goals. They are meeting and at times exceeding them. We need to understand that, because together, collectively, we have to move faster, we have to be stronger, and we have to work better together. Because actually, again, if they keep going at the pace that they're going, we're not going to enjoy, and when I say we, I'm talking about that the collective group of like-minded states led by the United States, we are at risk of that superiority that I think you currently enjoy, being eroded. So we've got work to do, but it's very important that we understand what China's doing so that we can respond appropriately.
So, I appreciate that you're your thinking, if you're speaking for all of Australia, maybe not, but your perspective there is very comparable to the U.S. perspective, so I appreciate that. Are there some specific space activities that Australia is cooperating with the U.S. on, some investments and so forth? I'm thinking of space domain awareness, and maybe there's some other examples if you have any specifics you could share.
Yeah, so again, you're always going to hear from me that I want us to be doing more and contributing more, but a really important move that Australia has made, at least conceptually, is wanting to move from being a consumer of and a beneficiary of space and space services, particularly of those and in defence here and militarily of the US, to being a contributor. And we are so uniquely placed to offer so much to the enterprise and to the collective around that. It's not just geography, although our geography is exceptional for space. It's where we are in the world, and it's just the untapped potential that we have in and around our industry. In terms of space domain awareness, yes, we contribute very much. We're a very networked part of the US system for space domain awareness. We have a strong ground segment. We have the space surveillance telescope, for example, over in Exmouth, and so we are and have been for a long time collaborating well. But as I would have said in my response to the previous answer, we've really got to step it up. So what I see in our industry is we've got some really niche capabilities, some bleeding edge, excellent technology, especially in and around space domain awareness, both from the ground but also from in space. Some really innovative companies that are working both on sort of satellites, payloads, launch. There are a lot more areas that we can contribute, but we have an issue with critical mass, we have an issue with scale, and we have a challenge of not allowing this wonderful capability to be too diffused or dispersed. So what I would like to see us do, or the government do, is to be that focal point, to provide a strategy, to put some more deliberate sort of framework and bring those actors together, so that we can be more than the sum of our very geographically and technically dispersed capabilities.
Is there another country maybe that you look at as a model for pulling it together? I'm thinking of the UK in particular, because maybe 20 years ago the UK may have been in a similar situation, maybe not quite exactly comparable.
We do often look to the UK, and we collaborate incredibly closely with them through the Five Eyes. But another one is Canada. And I think Canada's done something really smart in the way that they focused, for example, in their commercial and civil program on the Canada arm. They carved out for themselves a particular niche to coalesce their national effort around. I think we need to do something similar to that. But we do find ourselves comparing what we're doing and how we're going with countries like the UK and Canada. We, of course, have the really great visibility because our Five Eyes nations have the Combined Space Operations Initiative, and we do so very much through that. But expanding beyond defence and leveraging commercial into defence to follow this kind of new space trend and what's happening here in the United States, I really think we need to think a lot more creatively about what is special about Australia. What is it that Australia brings for us as a nation? What does space do for us as a nation? And how do we contribute again to that collective in a complementary way, in a way that lifts us all as a collaborative endeavour? I think there's a lot more that we can do if we're just a little bit more deliberate and focused in the way that we go after space.
So thank you for all those great examples and exemplars, I guess, for Australia to look at in nations at a comparable investment level, potentially on space and military space. Could you explain a little bit for this audience what Combined Space Operations is, you mentioned?
Yeah. So this was a US-led initiative, but it grew from the Five Eyes Intelligence Initiative, and it realised that there were mechanisms and habits and ways of sharing information there that we could bring into the space domain. So what that does is really allow, as a core group of nations, those Five Eyes, which is the United States, Canada, the United Kingdom, Australia and New Zealand, to come together as sort of the hub, if you like, of a hub and spokes model of reaching out for global cooperation. It is a military initiative, and it started off with conversations in three broad streams. There's a policy and legal stream, there's a capability architecture stream, and an operations stream. But what that initiative has seen happen is we have Australian now Space Force officers on the floor at the Combined Space Operations Centre in Colorado Springs. So along with Canadians, with members with UK and with New Zealanders as well. So on a day-to-day basis, we are working really closely together. We have meetings at senior levels around this initiative at least once a year. We have working groups in each of those areas, and what that's been able to do is lift all of us again to a certain standard, and it's habituized a level of collaboration that I think was really, really important for the US, which had become used to being a bit of a solo actor in space, but didn't want to do that anymore. But it needed to uplift other nations' capability to go along with it on the ride and to contribute. That's also allowed outreach. So now you see France and Germany brought into some of those efforts, and I think even countries like Japan are increasingly being also brought in. So it's serving as a great vehicle for stronger international collaboration in the space domain for operations, for policy, but increasingly importantly for architecture. And with the explosion of commercial space and the way that space architecture is changing and growing, and the military use of that is really interesting and important. So CSPO, I think, has been a real success, and is it's a central feature of our defence cooperation in space.
Yeah, and so it's like an emerging space defense alliance, I think, although it's not formalized that way at all, but that's the way I kind of think of it in the back of my mind.
Yeah.
We have NASA doing Artemis, and there's a lot of Artemis countries and a lot of cooperation going on that front. But I think this emerging CSPO alliance, so to speak, is really important for our security and defense going forward. Could you, I want to circle way back a few minutes in the conversation to where we were talking about space and deterrence.
Yeah.
Are there some specific, I'm thinking of WGS satellites. I can't remember what WGS stands for exactly. I think it's wideband global satcom.
It is.
But I'm aware Australia has contributed actually to that U.S. Space Force communication satellite network. Can you explain how Australia contributes to that, and then how that relates to deterrence?
Yeah, great question. So Australia, along with others, I don't think we were the only one, contributed by investing in one particular satellite. I think it was the 9th in that constellation. And in doing so, we got the benefit of the whole constellation in terms of the information sharing. So we kind of bought into the system through just one, but that contribution obviously lifted and grew the capability more. Why is that important? For deterrence, it's really vital that we are able to demonstrate that we are united in our intent, united in our investments, united in the way that we think about and operate in the space domain. So things like CSPO, collaborative manifestations of investments like that are hugely important. But I was reminded when General Shaw, now retired, visited Australia, probably December 2023, I think it was. He made a really interesting point on this, and that was, for deterrence purposes, as you think about resilient and responsive space and redundancy and hybrid architecture, we want to be introducing different capabilities as well to complicate that challenge for an adversary. So if we're all buying into exactly the same systems all the time, we're not creating that sort of proliferated architecture. So it is both important that we have shared and common capabilities. Interoperability is always important, but that really struck a chord with me when he said that, because the challenge, the problem of space for an adversary is complicated by the different, the varied capabilities that we all bring to the party. So there's a bit of a balance to be achieved there in how we think about space and deterrence, and either being too much part of the same system and not creating enough of a complication for them.
And at the political level, I just piggyback on that, and I think it also is, instead of just attacking a U.S. constellation, if an adversary ever decided to attack a U.S. Military constellation of satellites, it'd be not just a U.S. constellation, it'd be an alliance, like we were speaking about a minute ago. Many countries' capabilities they're attacking, which raises the stakes for them politically,
Absolutely.
And their strategy. So I appreciate your thinking on that. I guess, so we've been talking about how great cooperation is, and how it's important, and there's a growing cooperation, but what are some of the barriers? What's holding things back? I think, of course, the level of investment that countries can contribute compared to the U.S., because the U.S. is so big and has so much money, relatively speaking, to a lot of our allies and partners. So besides the level of investment, are there other barriers to cooperation that we need to somehow work around?
Yeah, look, there are, and again, this is a really important issue for us to talk about. You mentioned right at the start that it's really hard for the US, with its scale and its capability, to comprehend perhaps how small and how little capability, or how hard it is for some allies to sort of bring in a really coordinated and coherent way those capabilities to bear. But so scale remains a challenge, but all of the allies, I think, we are starting to organise in ways that are making that easier to plug and play together. So that's really important. Capability-wise and maturity-wise, sophistication of the industry and of the way that we've thought about space, and even in defence, because we had such a heavy reliance on the US, we didn't do a lot of our own thinking in Australia about space. We kind of just joined the club and well, fast followed, if you like. But lifting our capability to bring different thinking, new thinking, and genuinely something important and complementary to that collective, to that alliance, if you like, is still a challenge. It is still a challenge. Technically, a lot of us are not quite where we might need to be, and that ability to share technology and information, because of the highly classified, as John Hyten often said, over-classified nature of space capabilities in the space domain, that still does get in our way. Australia's recently signed, and I should have mentioned this in the front in terms of exciting developments, but we've recently signed a technical safeguards agreement, which will allow US commercial launch from Australia, including for defence payloads. That is huge. That is huge. We really need to make really good advantage of that. And again, coming back to your point on deterrence, how amazing would it be to have that another option in the Indo-Pacific, where we can reach sort of cadence because of low air and maritime traffic that others can only dream of in terms of responsive space. There are just so many opportunities for us to do more. The TSA has really helped, that technical safeguards agreement, pave the way for some operational and really practical collaboration. But there are further technical and classification barriers, I think, that do still get in our way.
I think from my research, there's like policy and legal barriers. Some countries just can't do stuff because of the domestic law or domestic regulations. That's a barrier. So working through those and figuring out a way to overcome those barriers, I think are important. And you kind of alluded to that. And signing an actual agreement helps, remove some of those barriers. So congratulations on that recent agreement. The other thing, though, I think is important is having a champion
Yes.
to help push through the bureaucracy and the naysayers, or that it's natural for there always to be skeptics. So besides you, who are some names we should be watching for as champions for Australian space?
Oh, look, we have a number within industry. We have Catherine, of course, who will be doing her very best to advocate for Australian space and for what the global space economy has to offer Australia and Australians. In my own institute, one of my analysts on my team, Dr Malcolm Davis, has been passionate and written about space for a really long time, and he will never stop. I promise you, he will never stop. We have amazing women. Anna Moore at ANU in space is an incredible space leader. Katrina Steer, Melissa DeSwart. I'm naming all women, which I'm delighted to do. But making wonderful contributions in terms of industry and doing really exciting stuff. Will Crow is co-founder and CEO. I might have that wrong, but he's definitely a co-founder of High Earth Orbit Robotics, which is an amazing space company that does in-space space domain awareness. We have Adam Gilmore, who is developing a sovereign rocket capability and launch capability in our country, and we all wish him the greatest of success, because it would be wonderful to have a genuine sovereign launch capability. We've got private launch providers. We've got Southern Launch down in the south, which can provide excellent access to sun-synchronous and polar orbits. We have Equatorial Launch Australia right up in the north, 12 degrees south of the equator, terrific for efficient and heavier launch and to reach those higher orbits. Again, efficiently and safely. And Australia is a landmass. I think we've got a lot in the academic area, in the startup area. We've got some big multinationals that are helping and offering some supply chain opportunities for Australian companies. But yeah, there's a lot to look out for, a lot from Australia. So just keep your eye on the space, pardon the pun, more generally, and a few names will be jumping at you. Hypersonics might be another one. Oh, great company that has signed an agreement with the Defence Innovation Unit and partnering with Rocket Lab, doing some really exciting stuff.
Well, I'm familiar with several of the names you mentioned.
Oh, very good.
But not all of them. So I have to more people for me to look up and connect with.
I have to say one more, because he's an absolute gem and does so much for our community. Tim Parsons. I don't know if you've heard of him, but he's associated with the SmartSat CRC, a cooperative research centre, and AROSE, which is a really important initiative, which is again one of those forcing functions to bring Australian companies together around a mission.
Great.
So thank you, Tim.
Moving on to a slightly shifting gears a little bit, moving on to some slightly different subjects. How is Australia involved in wider cooperation? We've talked about CSPO, combined space operations, looking at the UK and Canada and so forth. But how is Australia involved in wider cooperation for defense and resilience with AUKUS? And what is AUKUS, I guess? Australian, United Kingdom, United States Alliance on Nuclear Submarine Development, but there may be a role for space in that in the future?
Absolutely. So AUKUS, as we call it, which you're absolutely right, it's just an acronym of Australia, the UK and the US, is a really important initiative. It's got two pillars. Pillar one is the nuclear powered, conventionally armed submarines, where we work initially with the United States to purchase a couple of Virginia class submarines and really learn how to use that kind of capability. We've had diesel operated submarines before, so this will be a huge step up for Australian capability. The UK is also helping us design the future submarine that the UK and Australia will jointly build, manufacture, own and operate. So a really long-term national endeavour for all of our countries, and in terms of deterrence and in terms of working together and collaborating, an enormously important initiative. What's not as much talked about is Pillar 2, and that's the advanced capabilities pillar. it's a lot of us in the space domain are scratching our heads about why space isn't articulated as a priority. AI and autonomy, advanced cyber, undersea warfare, quantum. There are 6 particular technical capabilities that that the AUKUS Pillar 2 nations are focusing on, working together and delivering capability together on. Space, I think, is in every single one of them, because it is one of those domains where every other technology, AI, it all plays out. There's a role for every single one of those technologies in experimentation, in science, in war fighting, in the space domain. So what we like to say is that space might not be there explicitly, but space is there by stealth. Because it's something that we have to, every single one of those technologies has to be taken into space and realised in space if we're actually going to achieve what we want to achieve from AUKUS. But I think there's potential for a stronger focus on space through AUKUS Pillar 2, and I think it could provide an organising concept, again, where at the moment industry will say we're struggling to understand exactly what you want within those priority technology buckets. I think that the space domain and understanding the kinds of capabilities that can manifest there using AI, using autonomy, using robotics, how does space relate to the undersea and the maritime domain, and you mentioned that before. It's a really great lens for us, I think, to help us actually realise a lot of those Pillar 2 objectives, both terrestrially and in the space domain. So a stronger focus for space and Pillar 2 would be awesome. But of course, space is essential to support Pillar 1 too when we're operating submarines.
Yeah, that's a good point too.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for that, because my understanding of that whole ecosystem there has been pretty minimal. You know, I've just thought, nuclear submarines. So thank you for clarifying so much of that. That's a very good understanding, raising my understanding, and hopefully the audience too, of the potential there. Shifting gears again slightly. So the U.S. Department of Defense and U.S. Space Force in 2024 came out with commercial integration strategies for Department of Defense architectures. And how do you view that in Australia? Is that going to make cooperation with the U.S. harder or easier, or really make no difference? What's your opinion on that, or thoughts on that?
I think it's exciting. It's exciting from a US perspective, because the explosion in growth in the commercial sector is something that Defence has to take advantage of. And I think what the US Space Force and Space Command are doing to integrate commercial space is not only world leading, but it sets a great example, but it also creates further avenues for all of us, particularly in the close allied space community of the CSPO nations, for example, to tap in and learn. What we are going to struggle with is that we don't have the maturity in our commercial sector. We don't necessarily have the private capital flowing in the same way that the US does. But once again, what a great opportunity to leverage lessons and to not duplicate but integrate the way that we think about this. So I think for Australia, that what the US is doing in those integration strategies and thinking about commercial space and what it brings to the US Space Force is not only a great example for us to follow and learn from, but an opportunity for us, for our companies, for our industry, and again, a rising tide lifts all boats, right? So for us, enormous opportunity for all of the US's allies here. But I think the US is uniquely placed at the moment to be reaping the benefits, and we've all got to learn and leapfrog and get there, or as close as we can to where you're at, as fast as we can.
Well, hopefully those U.S. strategies will help stimulate our allies and their industrial bases even more to contribute in this vital area. Yeah. So I think we're getting towards the end here, and I'd just like to give you an opportunity to, if there's any key message you'd like to provide the audience from your perspective or take away from our discussion, the floor is yours.
Oh, thank you. It's been wonderful to have this conversation with you. I guess one more thing that I would like to foot stomp, if you like, is just how incredibly important space is, that we've got to keep our eye on what's happening in the global space economy. People call it new space, space 2.0, space 3.0, whatever you want to call it. It is dynamic, it is exciting, it has so much to offer every sector. And like you said, to draw in specialists and expertise from so many disciplines. So we've really got to understand how important this is and be a really big part of it. And for Australia, we've got to find our role and step forward and grasp the nettle, if you like, of becoming a genuine space power. I think we can do that, and I think what's happening in the global economy is offering us enormous opportunity.
Well, thank you very much. We'll leave that as the last word. Appreciate you being here. Have a good travels, safe travels on your globe-trotting summer here in the Northern Hemisphere anyway.
Yep.
And safe travels, and I hope we cross paths again in the future.
Thank you, Mick. It's been great talking to you.
You too. Over to you, Colleen.
Well, that was interesting. The idea of kind of complicating the architecture to build deterrence and resilience through this type of coalition building. It's not just Five Eyes anymore. It's things like AUKUS and other bilaterals. So thank you to both of our speakers, Rebecca and Mick. And to our audience, you can check out our past shows, 140 of them, on YouTube or wherever you get podcasts. They're also arranged by kind of key topic areas, along with our in-depth research papers on space policy and strategy at csps.aerospace.org. You can join the mailing list from there to get notifications about new papers and new shows. And thank you to James Liggins, our technical director. Take care.